Let me be clear about something that the technology industry's leadership, the intelligence community's public affairs apparatus, and the financial institutions with exposure to American cloud infrastructure are desperately hoping you will not fully understand. What just happened to Google's data center infrastructure is not a cyber attack in the conventional sense that term has been applied to Iranian offensive operations over the past decade. It is not an opportunistic intrusion by criminal proxies. It is not an act of digital espionage seeking intellectual property. What the evidence, and I will walk you through that evidence in precise technical detail, indicates is a deliberate, calculated, physically consequential action taken in direct response to the documented role of American technology companies in providing the intelligence infrastructure that has enabled Israeli military operations against Iranian-aligned forces across the region. Having spent decades in military intelligence, having sat across tables from both American technology executives and national security officials who were navigating the deliberately blurred line between Silicon Valley commercial infrastructure and American military intelligence requirements, I can tell you that the convergence that just occurred was not unpredictable. It was, in fact, predicted by analysts who understood that Iranian strategic planners were documenting the specific technical contributions of American technology companies to Israeli targeting and were making deliberate decisions about whether and how to respond to those contributions. Before we go any further, I need you to understand the precise causal chain that connects American technology company infrastructure to Israeli military operations, because that connection is the entire predicate for understanding what just happened. The modern Israeli military targeting cycle for precision strikes against hardened targets depends on artificial intelligence-assisted analysis of imagery, signals intelligence, and pattern of life data that is processed through computational infrastructure substantially exceeding what Israeli military systems can provide domestically. The specific Google Cloud contracts, detailed in documents that have circulated in technical communities despite active suppression efforts, provided Israeli Defense Force targeting units with access to computational resources, machine learning processing infrastructure, and database management systems that are directly integrated into what the IDF calls Project Nimbus. Project Nimbus is not, as it has been characterized in the sanitized public discussion, simply a cloud migration project for routine government data processing. It is, in the analytical assessment of people who have reviewed the contract specifications, the computational backbone of an intelligence-driven targeting architecture. Iranian intelligence services have been documenting Project Nimbus and its operational significance for approximately 3 years. They have been making a specific assessment. Does the infrastructure provided by American technology companies constitute a legitimate military target under the strategic calculus that governs Iranian asymmetric response options? The answer that Iranian planners arrived at, and the evidence of what just happened to Google's data center strongly suggests they have now acted on that answer, is that computational infrastructure directly enabling lethal military operations against Iranian-aligned forces meets the threshold for military targeting in the asymmetric conflict framework that Iran has been operating within since at least 2020. Stay with me, because what I am about to tell you about the specific technical characteristics of what happened to Google's infrastructure will explain why this event is fundamentally different from every previous Iranian cyber operation. The attack that struck Google's data center infrastructure was not a network intrusion in the sense of unauthorized access achieved through software vulnerability exploitation. Iranian cyber capabilities, which have been systematically underestimated by Western analysts for reasons I have never fully understood given the quality of the available evidence, have evolved substantially since the early days of the Shamoon malware and distributed denial of service campaigns against American financial institutions. What Iranian offensive cyber operators have developed with documented technical assistance from both Russian signals intelligence specialists and the accumulated reverse engineering of American offensive cyber tools exposed through previous operations is a capability to deliver physical consequences through cyber means. The specific mechanism involved what cybersecurity engineers call an industrial control system attack, targeting the operational technology layer that manages physical infrastructure in large-scale data center facilities. Modern hyperscale data centers operate cooling systems, power distribution units, uninterruptible power supplies, and physical security systems through industrial control system networks that are increasingly connected to, but supposed to be isolated from, the information technology networks that handle data processing. Iranian cyber operators successfully bridged that isolation barrier and delivered commands to physical control systems that created thermal cascade conditions in specific server arrays, causing physical damage that cannot be remediated by software updates or configuration changes. What the mainstream media will not tell you is the scale and specificity of what was targeted within Google's infrastructure. This was not a broad attack seeking to cause maximum disruption to Google's consumer services. The targeting was precise. The specific data center clusters that experienced physical damage are, based on the available evidence, the clusters that host the computational workloads associated with government and intelligence community contracts, including the specific Project Nimbus infrastructure that supports IDF targeting operations. Let me walk you through exactly what that level of targeting specificity implies about Iranian intelligence penetration of American technology company operations, because the implications are genuinely alarming. To target specific server clusters within a hyperscale data center with the precision that the available evidence suggests, Iranian intelligence operators needed to know not just the geographic location of the data center, not just the network topology of the facility, but the specific physical location within the facility of the server infrastructure associated with specific contractual workloads. That information is not publicly available. It is not contained in any regulatory filing or corporate disclosure. It exists in the operational documentation of the data center facility itself and in the contract specifications that define how specific workloads are allocated to specific physical infrastructure. The fact that Iranian targeting demonstrated this level of specificity means one of two things, or possibly both. Either Iranian intelligence has achieved penetration of Google's internal operational documentation systems at a level of depth that should be profoundly disturbing to every corporate and government entity that operates on Google Cloud infrastructure, or Iranian intelligence has recruited or otherwise obtained access to a human source with direct access to the operational allocation documentation that defines where specific government workloads physically reside within Google's data center network. Neither possibility is comfortable. Together, they suggest an intelligence penetration achievement by Iranian services that significantly exceeds what official American assessments of Iranian intelligence capability would acknowledge. You think you have heard the worst of it. You have not even close. The strategic implications of what just happened extend far beyond the immediate operational consequences for Google's infrastructure, or even for the continuity of specific Israeli military targeting systems. What Iran has just demonstrated is the operational viability of a doctrine that I would characterize as technology infrastructure targeting as strategic leverage. The doctrine holds that American technology companies whose infrastructure is integrated into American military or allied military operations represent legitimate targets in the asymmetric conflict that Iran is conducting with the American-Israeli security partnership. And the demonstration that Iranian cyber capabilities can translate that doctrine from theoretical framework to operational reality creates a new category of strategic risk that the American national security establishment has not adequately prepared for. Keep watching, because the consequence cascade from what just happened to Google's data center touches every American company that has any form of government contract relationship. And it does so in a way that creates an entirely new set of vulnerabilities that neither the corporate sector nor the national security establishment currently knows how to manage. The American technology industry has built its government contract relationships, on an implicit assumption that cyber risk from state-level adversaries would remain confined to the digital domain. The assumption has been that while Iranian or Chinese or Russian cyber operators might steal data, disrupt services, or extract intellectual property, they would not be able to translate cyber access into physical destruction of the infrastructure itself. What happened to Google's data center has just invalidated that assumption in operational terms. Physical damage through cyber means, targeted with precision against specific high-value infrastructure supporting military operations, is now demonstrated capability in the Iranian toolkit. The insurance, legal, and regulatory implications of that demonstration alone are staggering. American technology companies that hold government contracts are now potentially liable, both commercially and in terms of their security obligations under those contracts, for physical infrastructure risks from cyber attack that their current security architectures were not designed to prevent and that their current insurance arrangements do not adequately cover. The legal and financial shock to the American technology sector from this single event will take years to fully work through the system. Having spent years watching the interface between the intelligence community and the technology sector try to manage exactly this kind of emerging threat dynamic, I can tell you that the bureaucratic and legal machinery that now has to process what just happened is not optimized for rapid response. American corporate governance structures, insurance markets, regulatory frameworks, and national security legal authorities were all built around a model of cyber threats that does not include physical destruction of domestic infrastructure by foreign state actors through cyber means. Every layer of the response machinery that now has to engage with what happened to Google will encounter regulatory and legal ambiguity that slows the response and creates windows for continued exploitation. The reality that no official briefing will address is that the American technology sector's deep integration into American military and allied military operations has created a category of strategic vulnerability that has now been demonstrated as exploitable. The companies that participated in Project Nimbus and similar arrangements made a calculation that the commercial benefits of government contract revenue outweighed the strategic risks of becoming part of the military targeting architecture. What just happened to Google's data center is the first operational demonstration that this calculation was incorrect. What I have not yet explained is what this means for the broader question of where American-Iranian strategic competition goes from here. The targeting of American technology infrastructure represents an escalation to a domain that has been characterized as escalation sensitive precisely because of the civilian infrastructure involved. When Iranian cyber operations caused disruption to American financial institutions in the 2012 to 2013 period, the American response was calibrated to avoid escalation that would have crossed into kinetic retaliation. The current event involves physical destruction of infrastructure rather than temporary service disruption, and it involves infrastructure that the American government itself is a major tenet of. The American government cannot respond to the destruction of infrastructure it depends on as if it were purely a private sector event. But responding with the full weight of American state power creates an escalatory dynamic that Iranian planners are presumably calculating will remain within bounds that Iran can manage. The next 72 hours will reveal whether American decision makers agree with that Iranian calculation, or whether what happened to Google's data center proves to be the event that crosses the threshold for a qualitatively different category of American response. The decisions being made right now will determine whether this becomes a contained demonstration of Iranian capability or the opening salvo in a confrontation over the legitimate boundaries of technology infrastructure and asymmetric warfare that neither side has fully thought through the consequences of escalating. Watch this space with the understanding that what just happened is genuinely unprecedented, and unprecedented events have a tendency to produce consequences that the historical playbook does not adequately prepare decision makers to navigate. The full picture of what has happened to Google's infrastructure requires understanding the legal architecture within which American technology companies have been operating their government contract relationships. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the Executive Order, 12,333 Framework, the National Security Letters provisions of the Patriot Act. All of these legal instruments have been used to compel or enable American technology companies to provide capabilities, access, and infrastructure that serve American and allied intelligence and military requirements. Iranian intelligence services have been studying this legal architecture with considerable sophistication, and their assessment that the resulting integration of American technology infrastructure into military operations meets the threshold for targeting reflects a legal and strategic analysis that, however uncomfortable for Western audiences to acknowledge, has a certain internal logic. The companies that made the decision to participate in Project Nimbus and similar arrangements were not simply making business decisions. They were making decisions that placed their infrastructure and their employees within the scope of a strategic conflict. And they made those decisions without adequately communicating to shareholders, to their workforces, or to the public the full strategic implications of that integration. The Google employees who organized internal protests against Project Nimbus, many of whom were subsequently terminated, understood something that the company's senior leadership chose to discount. They understood that the integration of commercial technology infrastructure into military targeting operations creates categories of risk that commercial enterprises are not designed to manage. What just happened is the operational manifestation of the risk those employees were warning about. An understanding that the targeting of Google's data center was a response to specific documented strategic behavior by an American company, rather than an arbitrary act of aggression against civilian infrastructure, is essential for understanding what comes next in the escalation dynamics that this event has set in motion. Iranian strategic communications will be careful to articulate the causal connection between Project Nimbus and the targeting of Google's infrastructure. This articulation will be designed to put other American technology companies on notice that continued participation in military integrated contracts carries operational risk. It will also be designed to create political pressure within American technology companies, where significant proportions of technically sophisticated workforces have already demonstrated opposition to military contract work, to resist future government contract arrangements of the type that made Google a target.